Memory Techniques for Exams. This is a guide for University of Buckingham Business School students. So to start off with, I want you to think about your memory. Do you believe that you remember everything that you experience? Some people do, some people don't. But the simple fact is that we don't know the answer to that question. Not even scientists who study memory know the answer to that question. So what do we know about our memories? Well, we know that they are unreliable. The simple act of trying to recall an experience will change or can change our memory of that experience. That's the bad news. The good news is that our memories are trainable. So we can use that trainability to help make them more reliable. And particularly as we head into an exam revision period, which is a time when we're really saying to our memory, I need you to work really hard right now. Now, if our memories could reply to us, they might say something like, well, I can, but only if you're fulfilling my needs. Simple fact is that your memory does have needs, and if you know what those needs are, you can make your life much better, particularly in an exam revision period. To start off with, your memory needs to get new information that is provided in some sort of context, because that is how it retains information. Ideally, that context is provided by the learning experience, so it's something that you can link to things that you've learned previously, or perhaps link it to your previous experiences, and automatically it comes with that context attached to it. That's the ideal situation. But sometimes it's not that simple, and you have to find some memory tips or tricks that are going to make that learning more memorable, because it's just at the moment a little bit too disconnected and a bit too abstract. So what can you do under these circumstances? Well, there are several things. You can look for an association. So don't worry if you can't automatically associate new knowledge with something that you previously learnt or are very familiar with. Look for ways to link that new information to old information however you can. So for example, if you're learning a new model or a new process, try and link it to something that you know has a structure that it can be applied to. A model that is used in a business context may be able to be linked to a model that you've used in a sport context. For example, the pitch of a playing field, a baseball diamond, or the positions in a cricket game. Whatever it is, you'll be able to find some way of linking that information together so that what you know very, very well, what you've experienced a great deal, can be overlaid on top of the information that you're trying to learn and make more memorable. In these instances, it's also good to link past and present. So anything that you've remembered from your past has at least got something very memorable about it. So if you can attach new information to that, perhaps an experience that you had in the past, perhaps even to the stages of growing up, which can be linked to a business process or a business model that you're learning for the first time. And whenever you're making these associations, it's important to think about the element of surprise. This is really working with your brain on its own terms. So your memory is really triggered or activated by things that are surprising, that are shocking, that are unexpected, things that are completely incongruous or perhaps funny and silly. Anything like that is fodder for your memory. It's going to catch on to that, and that association is going to make your learning so much better. And don't worry about looking for things that actually exist. You could take the most boring subject in the world and attach something very shocking or surprising to it, and simply by creating that memorable association, you've made that boring material more memorable. And then stories. So right from birth we have been learning through stories, we've been listening to stories. They are the way that we make sense of the world already. So it stands to reason that they're also a good way to make sense of new material. So use your meaningful associations, use your surprise and shock value to help you create really memorable stories for new information that you're trying to remember. In addition to making learning material more memorable using tricks, you can also make the learning experience more memorable as well. So this might be particularly useful if you're studying for a subject that you find really quite difficult. You might think about the fact that novelty value can be harnessed in a different way. So you might decide that for that particular subject you're going to study in a different location, maybe even a surprising location, a memorable one, so that just the memory of studying there is going to create a link to the information automatically in your memory. You can work even harder than that to make places and locations work for you by associating what you're learning with physical locations directly. A common way of doing this is to use memory palaces, and this is where you use a building or a room that you're very familiar with and attach items that you're learning to different locations within that room, so that when you imagine in your mind's eye you travelling around that room or looking around that room, you'll be able to see these incongruous or items one at a time as you go through the room. In all of these cases, or in most of these cases, what you're using is your visual memory. So your ability to visualize something in your mind's eye is a huge asset to you when you're trying to learn these abstract concepts or difficult new information. And don't worry about whether you're a visual learner or not. This is a capacity that all human beings have, and if you can visualize something in your mind's eye, and if you can remember locations, then you can attach new meanings and new information to them to make them significant for you enough to make them memorable. What else does your memory need? Well, it needs some downtime. So although in practice it may not be possible to fill up your long-term memory, and you may have almost endless resources there, it is also the case that there are really quite strict limits on how much you can do with your working memory capacity. So even though your brain may not be full, it feels like it's full. So you can't just work it forever and expect it to keep up with you, and you certainly can't expect it to work at an optimal level all the time. So focused attention of the sort that you use when you're revising for exams is something that you can only do for limited periods of time, and if you try and stretch beyond those limits, what you find is you're getting into territory where your memory is not at all optimized. In fact, it will be quite compromised. There is the first and last rule of memory that kicks in here. So generally speaking, if we learnt something or if we had an experience, we remember what happened at the beginning of that experience or at the end of that experience much better than what happened in the middle. If you think back to a lecture you've attended, you'll probably find that this applies. You can remember something that happened at the beginning and something that happened at the end. Now, if you've studied for a 2-hour or a 3-hour period of time without any breaks in between, that means that your memory was only working at a reasonably good to optimal level for a very short period of time at the beginning and the end of that 2 hours. If, however, you had put regular breaks in, for example at 30-minute intervals, included a 5-minute break or even a shorter than 5-minute break, you've given yourself an opportunity to refresh your attention and to make sure that your memory is benefiting from that first and last rule of what makes information or what makes learning memorable much more. Final thing that your memory needs is your focus. So this is a statement of the obvious, but it's a necessary one to make, because we live in times and we study in environments where distraction is all around us. And so it's important to note that all of those distractions do have effect on your memory. There is no such thing as multitasking. There is, however, task switching. This switch happens so quickly that you're not aware that it's happening. But it is happening, and it is interfering with memory formation. So if you've ever walked into a room and forgotten what you walked into that room for, you've experienced what it's like to be distracted in the process of trying to form a memory. And that will be happening to you every time you respond to your phone, every time you are distracted by a message or by a beep or by a link or by an email. So that's something that you need to bear in mind, that it's your memory that is primarily affected by those sorts of events interfering during your revision. So what else can you do to make your memory more reliable? Well, it's important that you've created well-trodden routes and paths between your long-term memory and your short-term memory, and you know how to retrieve information between those two sites so that it is workable and usable in an exam environment. And then the information that you've put in your long-term memory, you need to have made sure that it's put in a way that is not just lots of random pieces of information everywhere, but it has a structure to it. And this is known as chunking. This is the idea that if you can link pieces of information together while you're revising, you should do it then, because those links mean that that information is securely held in groups of information that's going to make it so much easier for you to retrieve it later on. Now, we mentioned working memory before. There used to be a theory that working memory had about 7 slots in it. So this is 7 items that you can keep in the working part of your memory, so you can think about them and debate them and be conscious of them at any moment in time. That's been revised, and now people are thinking, well, probably it's more like maybe around 4 slots in your working memory, and that includes looking at the clock and checking how much time you've got left and sort of worrying about the guy next to you who won't stop coughing and is distracting you. All of that is taking up space in your working memory. So what do you do with this very limited number of slots of information that you can work over? Well, by chunking, what you do is you ensure that bringing one piece of information into your short-term memory drags with it a lot of other associated information, and so automatically you get access to a much greater store of remembered knowledge than you would if you just put things in individually and hadn't thought about how they related to each other. But a word of warning here, this doesn't mean that you should go away and memorize large answers, because that isn't useful in an exam environment. You don't know what question's going to be put in front of you, and preparing an answer for an unseen question is just not sensible. Instead, what I'm recommending is that, yes, you chunk your information, you make sure that you've thought about the relationship different ideas and different subjects have to each other, and then you've checked to see how those chunked pieces of information link together. So what you've got here is a really quite comprehensive body of information, but it's flexible information. So when you get to see that unseen question, you can apply it in different ways depending on which is the best way to answer that question. So, thank you for your attention. Good luck in your exams. If you would like some more help with revision strategies, there is another video. There's also one on exam stress management that you can have a look at as well.